Welcome to Crimson Clues, where shadows hide secrets and silence reveals the truth. Every story is a puzzle, and every clue takes you closer to the answer. Subscribe now, join the hunt, and let the mystery begin. Chapter 1. Poirot and I got off the train at Santa Maria Nola, station in Florence at the beginning of October 1928. Through a layer of towering clouds, the city was illuminated by a pale fall sun. The aroma of drying leaves, cold smoke from the trains, and the combined aroma of roasting chestnuts filled the air. On my first trip to Florence in a number of years, I was once again astounded by the unlikely balance of color and proportion in everything I saw, including the calm arches of the bridges over the Arno, the chilly marble of the cathedrals, and the warm ochre of the buildings. Lady Bianca Visconti, an Englishwoman who had married into one of Florence's oldest and most distinguished houses, had written a letter in a clear, definite hand that had sparked our adventure. During my army days, I had casual acquaintance with Lady Bianca, a tall, elegant woman who exuded a certain detached air, as if she were constantly watching the world rather than inhabiting it. Before they moved to Italy, her marriage to Count Alessandro Visconti, man with enormous estates and an even larger temper, had been the focus of a lot of talk in London society. She had left a brief letter. I need your advice on a very sensitive topic, my dear Poirot. Here are rumors that have the potential to ruin lives if left unchecked. I implore you to visit Florence right away and to bring the man who is both your chronicler and your friend along. Time is of the essence. The request seemed tantalizingly ambiguous to me. During our journey from Dova to Kalala and again on the train through the Italian countryside, I urged Poirot for specifics, but he simply twirled his mustache and repeated, "Hastings, patience. A sowl is similar to a mystery. The oven door will collapse if you open it too soon." At the station we were greeted by a chauffeur standing next to a shining black Lancia, wearing a long gray overcoat and a peaked cap. His face was as expressionless as a statue. After our bags were loaded into the back of the vehicle, we were speeding through the city streets in a matter of minutes, with the traffic stream separating us from the other vehicles. In October, Florence is a city in transition. The cafes were once again full of residents, and the piazzas were quieter now that the summer guests had left. The facades of Renaissance palazzi glowed in the mild light, and here and there in a courtyard, glimpsed through an open gate, one could see lemon trees in terracotta pots and hear the splashing of a fountain. I noticed that Poirot was remarkably quiet. His gaze darted from building to building as he sat up straight, gloved hands folded neatly on the head of his stick. As we crossed the Piazza della Signoria, he whispered, "Hastings, regards. It is a precise, well-organized city." Florence and Hercule Poirot can comprehend each other based on the lines and symmetry. In a more sedate area of the city, the Visconti Palazzo was a majestic structure made of warm, honey-colored stone. Set deep into the walls, its windows featured carved stone lintels, and the large entrance door, secured with iron studs, appeared to be built to last the ages. The air inside was cold and slightly fragrant, with the residual aroma of lies and beeswax polish. We were welcomed by Lady Bianca in a parlor with a frescoed ceiling that featured a riot of garlands and cupids in faded but still endearing hues. She wore a simple but exquisitely tailored gown of dove-gray silk and wore no jewelry other than a thin silver bracelet. Her eyes, though still striking, looked to bear the weight of restless nights, and her black, wavy hair, styled in the modern way, framed a face that had become leaner since I'd last seen her. "I am so grateful you could come, Miss Poirot." "Captain Hastings," she said in a clear, low voice. "There have been whispers, and whispers may be hazardous in Florence, but I'm not sure how to start." Poirot bowed his head. "You speak, madame, of those social murmurs that may bruise the reputation, or of whispers to which the police might give their attention." Her cheekbones took on a slight hue. "Both, I fear. Perplexed, I leaned forward. Is there a miscommunication? Or even a theft issue? With a calm yet determined tone, she interrupted. Captain Hastings, don't misunderstand. My husband is dead. The quiet ticking of an elaborate mantel clock was the only sound to break the brief silence. Dead? I said foolishly again. However, she claimed that he was discovered in his private study yesterday morning. The cops suspect it was murder. Poirot's stare intensified, while his voice remained as gentle as before. As if to confirm that the tall double doors were closed, her gaze strayed to them during the whispers. Madame. They claim that I killed him. Pugh's eyes did not make Lady Bianca wince. You see, I had been at odds with Muzio Alessandro for a while. He was a man with strong emotions and jealousies of equal intensity. He was lovely and attentive during the first 2 years of our marriage, but there were arguments over the last 2. Oh, nothing to be heard by the servants, nothing that could be referred to as public, but yet resentful remarks. As she spoke, I saw the slightest tightening of her fingers, but her hands were still resting lightly on the carved arm of her chair. Strange? Poirot asked. Indeed. He insisted on staying at the Villa del Rose, a house in the hills outside of the city, for a large portion of his tenure. There, he hosted visitors, some of whom I was not allowed to meet, and others whom I did not know. She smiled faintly, without amusement. Alessandro had an idea of marriage that was perhaps more common in the 16th century than the 20th. In public, a wife should be a showpiece. In private, she should be incredibly patient. And in private, she should keep quiet about personal matters. With gentleness, Poirot said, and yesterday morning, he unexpectedly returned to the Palazzo 2 nights ago, she said, drawing in a breath. I had been at the opera with friends, and when I came home, I found him in his study. We exchanged only the briefest words. Signorina Teresa Bardi, my cousin, and I went riding early the following morning. The police were here when I got back. They informed me that the valet had discovered Alessandro sitting at his desk at 9 o'clock, but he was very much dead. I could not help myself. Lord, how? At first, they believed it a seizure until they noticed the blood. Blood? I asked, startled. She inclined her head. A wound to the side of his skull. The coroner believes he was struck once with considerable force. Beside him on the floor was an old copper inkwell with a blackened edge. It must be the weapon, according to the police. Poirot gently lifted a finger. And the study, was it in disorder? No, that is the curious thing. Nothing appeared stolen. His wallet was in his breast pocket, and his cufflinks and watch were still on the desk. It was as though she faltered, as though whomever did it wanted only him dead and nothing else. Poirot had half-closed eyes. Madame, was there anyone else in the house that morning? Myself, Teresa the valet, and our housekeeper, Signora Bellini. Alessandro's secretary, Carlo Mattetti, arrived just before the cops. She paused, then added. The whispers began nearly at once. You may probably guess why. Because of the arrangement. I indicated that, and the fact that Alessandro had made certain accusations against me, wild, absurd things, that I was disloyal. She straightened her back, the muscles in her neck taut. Captain Hastings, I don't act like we had a nice marriage, but I didn't murder him. Poirot's voice sounded pleasant, yet there was an edge to it. And the accusations, were they wholly without foundation? Without hesitation, she responded, entirely. The Count might be creative. If I so much as spoke twice to the same male at a swear, he would insist I had taken a lover. After a moment of hesitation, she let out a short, rueful laugh. Certainly, scandal is a source of joy for Florentine society. A lady walking unchaperoned with a male is enough to start tongues wagging for a fortnight. Poirot inclined his head thoughtfully. However, when the man is discovered dead, the tongues wag louder, madame. For the first time, I saw a shadow of actual dread in her eyes. That is why I sent for you. I can bear unkind gossip, sire, but I cannot bear the thought of standing in a courtroom accused of my husband's murder with no one to defend the truth." She stood up as if to finish the interview, but her calm slipped for the briefest instant. "Monsieur Poirot, I did not love my husband, but I did not wish for his death. I beg of you, help me prove it." Poirot rose and gave a modest bow. "Madame." When the good name of a lady is in question, Poirot cannot be indifferent. "I'll deal with this issue." Her shoulders became somewhat more relaxed. "You'll talk to the cops." "In due time," Poirot stated. "I have to talk to the valet who discovered the body first, and then to the others who last saw the Count alive. You'll help me by making sure the house stays, what do you say, intact. Nobody shows up or departs." Lady Bianca's dark eyes stared at him as she nodded slightly. "I had to make a comment as we were leaving. Then you think she's innocent?" Poirot gave a small smile. "I know this, mon ami, but I don't believe anything yet. Every heart in Florence has a secret, and every stone has a history. N'est-ce pas? We'll find them both." The city was glowing in the soft autumn light outside. In my imagination, I only saw the dark stain on the edge of a Renaissance inkwell and the silent figure of the dead Count, even if somewhere a church bell announced the hour and a flock of pigeons circled over the rooftops. Chapter 2. Faces in the Palazzo. Lady Bianca herself conducted us along a cool, dim corridor whose flagstones were worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. The ceilings arched high above us, frescoed in soft blues and golds. We passed a series of salons, each furnished in the heavy elegance of an older age, carved walnut, velvet drapes, oil portraits in gilded frames. "The study is this way," she said. "But before you see it, there are people you should meet." The first was Teresa Bardi, Lady Bianca's cousin. A striking young woman in her early 20s. She had glossy black hair swept back from her forehead, and the kind of pale luminous skin that Italian painters seem to favor. She rose from a low armchair with a certain languid grace, and I noticed her eyes, large, dark and watchful, gave the impression of weighing one's worth before offering a smile. "You have come to help, Bianca," she said in lightly accented English. "That is good. She will need friends." Poirot inclined his head. "And you, mademoiselle, you were with Lady Bianca yesterday morning?" "Yes, we rode out together to the Cassin. We returned just before 10 o'clock. Poirot's voice was courteous. "And on this ride, did the conversation touch upon the Count?" Teresa tilted her head slightly. "We spoke of many things, horses, the weather, the color of the leaves by the river, but not of Alessandro, not directly." "Why should we? It was a fine morning." "But you knew he was in the house," Poirot persisted. "Of course, he returned the night before. I saw him in the hall. He greeted me politely. There was the faintest hesitation before the last word. I went to my room first to change. Then I heard voices in the hall and commotion." Her gaze drifted momentarily to the window. "Giulia was speaking quickly to Signora Bellini. I went down to see what was wrong. That was when I learned Alessandro was dead." Her tone was even, but I could not shake the feeling that she was choosing her words with care, like a fencer measuring each thrust. Poirot asked, "You were fond of the Count, perhaps?" A pause. "He could be difficult," she said, "but he was never dull. He noticed things about people that others missed. It is a rare quality." She glanced at Poirot with a faint smile, as though daring him to interpret her meaning. "Still, I preferred to keep my distance. And yet," Poirot's voice softened, "you live here in his house. My cousin invited me," she said simply. "Bianca is like a sister to me, and in Florence, family protects family." It was a curious choice of words. As we moved on, I glanced back. Teresa was watching us go, a faint, unreadable smile on her lips. Next, we were presented to Signora Bellini, the housekeeper, a stout woman in her 50s with a brisk, capable air. The sort who could manage a household of 50 without raising her voice. She wore a dark wool dress and a spotless white apron, her graying hair drawn into a severe knot. She curtsied to Poirot, gave me a polite nod, and clasped her hands before her. "It was Giulio who came to me," she began. "I was in the kitchen warming the milk for the coffee. He looked pale, not frightened exactly, but as if he had been running. He said the Count was not waking. I told him perhaps the padron had fallen, asleep over his papers, as he sometimes did after a journey. But Giulio said, 'No, signora, it is not like that.' So I went upstairs at once." She glanced between us as if to be sure we were following. The Count was sitting in his chair at the desk. His head was bent over his right shoulder. At first I thought he was only resting. I spoke to him softly, because the family were still abed. When he did not answer, I stepped closer. That is when I saw the mark here. She touched her temple with 2 fingers, a dark patch and the skin broken. Poirot inclined his head. "You did not touch the body." "I did not. It is not my place. I told Giulio to fetch the doctor, and I went to find the Contessa. I told her only that the Count was unwell. It is not good to give a shock all at once. And the room itself, signora, everything was in order," she said firmly. "The Count liked it that way. The papers on the desk were stacked neatly, the pens in their holder, the lamp lit. I remember the light because the curtains were still drawn, though the sun was up." She hesitated. "There was a drawer, not quite shut, the middle one. I saw it when I walked around to open the curtains. I thought perhaps the Count had been working in it. He kept all sorts of little things there, sealing wax, stamps, his spectacles." Poirot's eyes narrowed a fraction. "Nothing else struck you as unusual?" She shook her head. "Not then. Only later, when the police came, I thought it odd that his watch was in the drawer. The Count always wore it in the mornings, even if he was not going out." Poirot made no comment, but I could see his mustache twitch slightly. "You have been long in the household, signora." 17 years, as I keep the linen, the silver, the keys. I know when something is as it should be, and when it is not. But what happened in that room?" She lifted her shoulders. "That is for the police to decide. I keep to my work. That is how I have kept my position all these years." Giulio the valet was a narrow-shouldered fellow in his early 30s, with slicked back hair and a small mustache that might have been drawn with a ruler. His dark eyes flicked from Poirot to me and back again, as though measuring how much to say. It was I who took in the breakfast. He began speaking in deliberate English. 8:30 as always. Coffee, rose, a little fruit. The Count was at the desk writing. He told me to leave it on the side table. He seemed thoughtful. Poirot's tone was light. And when you returned, I brought the post just after 9, and I knocked. No answer. I thought perhaps he was reading, so I stepped in. He was still in the chair, had been as if asleep, but when I called to him, nothing. I came closer. Then I saw Giulio touched his temple, the mark and the inkwell on the floor. I knew at once. "You went to fetch the doctor?" Poirot asked. "I went first to the Contessa," Giulio said promptly. "She is mistress of the house. She must be told before anyone else." That struck me as curious. Teresa had claimed Giulio gave the news directly to Lady Bianca, yet Signora Bellini had insisted she was the one to do so. "You did not go to Signora Bellini?" Pooh asked as though the matter were unimportant. Giulio hesitated. "I passed her. Yes, perhaps I said something. But I thought it best the Contessa should know at once. She is the lady of the house." Poirot changed the subject. "And how was the Count's mood these past days?" Giulio's eyes flickered again. He had returned from the villa suddenly. There had been quarrels. The Count was a man who noticed everything, and sometimes imagined more. The Contessa and Signor Mazzetti, the secretary. They spoke often in the library, in the garden. Too often, perhaps, and the Signorina Bardi here." He hesitated, glancing towards the corridor. "She was always close to the Count. In this house, monsieur, closeness can be as dangerous as anger." "And did the quarrels concern such closeness?" Poirot prompted gently. Giulio gave the faintest shrug. "I am only the valet. I hear voices, I see faces. I do not ask what they mean. But 2 nights ago, the Count went first to the Signorina's rooms, then to the Contessa's. After that, there was no laughter in the dining room." Poirot's gaze rested on him a moment longer, but his voice remained courteous. "Mercy, monsieur, that will be all for now." As Giulio withdrew, I could not help feeling that his careful half-answers had been designed to do exactly the opposite of reassuring us. We found the Count's secretary in a narrow book-lined room at the far end of the corridor. Afternoon. Light slanted through high windows, striping the desk with gold. Papers lay in tidy stacks beside a brass letter scale. The arrangement was as precise as the man who rose to greet us. Carlo Mazzetti was tall and spare, his charcoal suit perfectly pressed, his dark hair drawn back from a high forehead. His movements had a certain deliberate economy, as if each gesture had been weighed before execution. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," he said in excellent English. "Lady Bianca tells me you are making inquiries." Poe inclined his head. "A few, yes. You worked closely with the Count for nearly 7 years. I managed his correspondence accounts and accompanied him when business required. One might say I knew him well, though I doubt anyone truly did. You were not here when he died. I was returning from the post office. There was commotion in the hall. Giulio told me the news." "And when did you last see him alive?" 2 nights before at the villa. We discussed legal documents. He seemed distracted, irritable. I gathered he meant to return to Florence the next day. Lady Bianca says his return was unexpected. With the Count, changes were expected. He valued his independence. Were there quarrels between him and the Countess? Maggetta's reply was measured. "I am her cousin by marriage, Messie. It is not my place to comment on private matters." "Yet you spoke with her often," Poirot said mildly. "We shared responsibilities." The Count's affairs were complex. Decisions had to be made in his absence, and the Count did not approve. A faint pause. In those final months, he approved of very little. His temper had grown unpredictable. I feared it might cause a breach. Poirot regarded him steadily. "On the morning of his death, the Count's watch was found in his desk drawer. Was that usual?" Maggetti's composure wavered. "No, he wore it every day unless he stopped," then added, "unless he expected a private meeting and wished not to be reminded of the hour." Poirot made no comment. Monsieur Mazzetti. Out in the corridor, I asked, "Well, Poirot, what do you think of him?" Pugh's smile was unreadable. "A man who measures every syllable, mon ami, and in the spaces between them. Much may be learned." Chapter 3. Examining the Deceased. We followed Lady Bianca to a corner chamber with large, shuttered windows that served as the Count's private study. As if it had been sealed off since the morning of the murder, the air had a slight staleness to it. A large mahogany desk stood squarely in the center of the room, its top meticulously arranged, and the windows were framed by heavy curtains of dark green damask. On the carpet close to the corner of the desk was the inkwell, a complicated bronze object styled like a crouching lion. I had to turn away when the stain caught the light and blackened its edge. Poirot stooped to avoid touching it. "This is the weapon, according to the cops." "Indeed." Lady Bianca's head bowed. "That's what the coroner thought." The strike was delivered with significant force from behind. Slowly, Poirot's eyes swept across the desk. A weighty fountain pen and a stack of neatly folded correspondence were opened. He knelt in front of the middle drawer, which was half an inch from the jar. "Madame," he said in a low voice, "was it found like this?" Signora Bellini saw it when she entered the room, and I think she did. Pulling out his handkerchief, Poirot gently opened it. There was a gold pocket watch with its chain neatly wound next to it on a velvet-lined tray inside. The compartments held a number of personal belongings, a tiny leather visiting card box, sealing wax, and a magnifying glass with an ivory handle. But there was more underneath the tray. A bundle of envelopes tied with delicate green ribbon. With unending caution, Poirot raised them and twisted them so that only we could see them. In a flowing feminine hand, the envelopes were addressed to a V rather than the Count. There were none with a return address. They were all postmarked from various Tuscany towns. Lady Bianca furrowed her brows. Those are something I have never seen. Poirot loosened the ribbon and stared at the first page, his expression unreadable. Finally, he retied the bundle and stated, "They are of a personal nature. It's always the same signature, just an initial." "Which initial?" I inquired. He slipped the letters back under the platter and answered gently, "NL. Hastings will talk about them again, but not here." In turn, he unlocked the other drawers. The one on the right included a sheath of bank statements, writing paper, and envelopes. A thick leather-bound ledger, carefully labeled keys, and household bills occupied the left. With the tact of a jeweler evaluating gemstones, Poirot took note of each. With a gloved finger he ran along the edge of the drapes. Here, the dust is disturbed, as if someone had drawn them tightly. According to Lady Bianca, they were drawn when the body was discovered. Poirot looked at the lamp on the desk. Nevertheless, the lamp was lit. A man opens his curtains and wishes for light. Perhaps a man who doesn't want to be seen. His gaze went across the carpet, pausing on the pile's subtle indentations. Here, across from the Count, previously stood a chair. Since then, it has been returned to the wall. Lady Bianca appeared surprised. It was not mentioned by the police. They might have seen, but said nothing. I, however, remark everything. Poirot stood up upright. "I won't bother you any more in this room for the time being, madam. However, I'll talk to everyone in the home once more, starting with Giulio. I'm interested in the steps he took from the hallway to this door." "What's the reason behind that?" As we were leaving, I inquired. "Because, according to mon ami," Poirot stated, "a man's memory is not always to blame when his story changes. It is his goal at times." Chapter 4, The Unspoken Name. We went back to the salon where we had been welcomed by Lady Bianca. Poirot chose to sit where he could command a view of the door, rather than accept coffee, which was exceptional for him. "Hastings," he whispered, "you will view today through your responses rather than your eyes. Watching for ripples, I'll toss a stone into the water." Members of the household were called in one by one, ostensibly to explain minor matters. First to arrive was Teresa Bardi, whose dark eyes were lively and inquisitive. Poirot struck up a discussion with Mademoiselle. While organizing the Count's documents, I discovered an oddity. It appears that there were sentimental, nicely written letters that were signed with the letter L alone. Do you know about them, I wonder? Teresa did a good job of hiding her surprise. Her grasp on the arm of her chair tightened slightly, but her smile stayed steadfast. "No," she murmured softly. "The Count knew a lot of people. I was unable to know them all." "Indeed," Poirot secretly said. "Yet these letters were kept close to hand in his desk beneath the tray. A place of value, madame." Teresa's head cocked. "They might have come from a craftsman. Leather, lace, and linen. The L's in trade are numerous." Poirot bowed his head, and she left without saying anything more. "Unundand," he whispered to me. "Just one ripple." Signora Bellini followed, her face displaying eager cooperation. She laughed briefly when Poirot brought up the letters. "A housekeeper is not a spy, monsieur, but a valet may be privy to his master's secrets. He was the owner of the letters if he kept them. I only come into contact with the linen." Poirot made a note, even though her response was sincere enough. Giulio then arrived. His eyes darted to the mantel clock and then back to Poirot, at the first mention of letters with the letter L. "Maybe from a childhood friend," he remarked in a deliberately casual tone. The Count had a large circle of friends. Friendships that led to arguments. Poirot's tone might have been gentle. Giulio paused. "Yes, there were arguments, but I don't inquire as to why." "You already told me," Poirot said softly, "that the Count had gone to Signorina Bard's rooms 2 nights prior, followed by the contestants. You claim to have informed the Contessa of his passing first this morning, but Signora Bellini claims you informed her first, which is accurate." Giulio felt a muscle in his jaw contract. "Maybe I saw them both almost simultaneously." It was a moment of confusion. Norm said, his voice now very kind. "Confusion is the result of forgetting specifics. You're not perplexed. You exercise caution. A distinction exists." Giulio's eyes grew gloomy, but he remained silent. Poirot nodded politely and dismissed him. Poirot's mustache quirked as the door shut. "It is not the police that he fears, Hastings." Finally, we dispatched Carlo Mazzetti. The secretary walked in calmly as usual, but his gaze flicked from Poirot's face to the desk for a moment, as if he was assessing the situation. Poirot said, "Monsieur Mazzetti, the Count was near you. Could you perhaps explain why there was a stack of letters on his desk that were all signed with the letter L?" Mazzetti's face flickered with uncertainty for the first time. Indeed, letters with a feminine handwriting style were sent from several locations in Tuscany, and were obviously personal in nature. "You didn't know about them?" Mazzetti's eyes flicked to the window and then back to Poirot. "No, m'sie, but they must have come from someone the Count cherished if they were present. Someone his wife was unaware of." Mazzetti stated politely, "I cannot speak to that. The Count was a private man in certain matters." Poirot leaned a little forward. "And yet his anger become erratic in the last weeks? Could that have been related to the writer of these letters?" Mazzetti's response was too hasty. "No." Poirot allowed the silence to linger until it started to feel a little awkward. "You handle the Count's correspondence," he added. "It is curious these letters escaped your notice." When Mazzetti finally stated, they must have been delivered to him privately. In such cases, he preferred to keep them apart. Poirot's gaze flashed. "Ah, separate. Yes, I see. And that's it, Massey. I couldn't control myself when we were by." "Poirot, do you think this L could be the key to the whole thing?" I asked. He said, "My dear Hastings," and got up. "In a case of murder, the key is often a lady, but one must be certain she exists before attempting to unlock the door." When Mazzetti had gone, Poirot stood a moment in thinking, the fingertips of both hands squeezed together. Then he asked Lady Bianca to join us and rang for the maid. She walked in with her customary grace, although her eyes were a little tired. "You have been questioning the household," she stated. "I trust you have learned something." Poirot bowed his head. "I've discovered that everyone here has an opinion, ma'am, even if some would rather express it with looks than words. However, the thoughts I cherish the most are those of you, the mistress of the house." She laughed briefly, almost ironically. "My opinions don't really matter, monsieur. I've been informed that my husband was killed. I've been informed that I am a suspect by the police. I haven't slept. I don't have much to eat, and I'm supposed to host guests as if this were just a bothersome break in the season." She instantly controlled the sharpening of her voice. "I apologize, but I'm exhausted." Poirot's eyes grew softer. "Fatigue can be dangerous, madame. It encourages more caustic speech than is wise. Sometimes the investigator receives that as a gift, and other times the adversary does." She slowly looked into his eyes. "I will then carefully select my candor. What are you interested in knowing?" "Your husband's desk has a stack of letters. Only the initial L was used to sign the letters. Are you aware of where they came from?" A deliberate but brief pause. "No, I didn't see them. You don't even take a chance." "I have no need to guess, monsieur. Alejandro's infidelities were rarely conducted." In privacy. If you're telling the truth, these letters are from the past, and I don't care about the past anymore. Poirot's head cocked. Even when an inkwell from the past enters the present. If you mean to ask whether jealousy drove me to kill my husband, the answer is no, she said, losing her cool for the first time. And I implore you to find her if you intend to imply that a lady from his past has done so. For every day she is missing, suspicion will be directed at me. Then she stood up with her hands clasped softly in front of her. Miss Poirot, I did not love Alejandro, but I will not have his murder pinned on merely because it fits the gossips of Florence. That's the reality. Poirot bent a little. I'll make sure the truth is heard after that. Chapter 5. The courtyard's ripples. The following morning was chilly and pale. Outside, the streets are still wet from the previous night's downpour. He declared over breakfast that he would take a short break. In the city, using a tone that brooked no argument. You will remain here, Hastings, he said, carefully buttering a roll. I have certain errands that require discretion, and your presence is conspicuous. Conspicuous? With some indignation, I said. You look like a man who believes everything. He hears, my friend. A face like that inspires confidence, which might be more helpful here than in Florence's post offices today. Soon after, he drove off in the black Lancia, holding a little envelope that I assumed included one of the enigmatic letters. It was quieter than usual in the Palazzo. I ventured into the inner courtyard, where the orange trees gleamed and the fountain hummed softly, since the rain had brought a cold. I had barely taken a seat on a rusty iron chair when I heard anxious, low voices coming from the far side's covered walkway. Giulio and Teresa Bardi were there. She was saying, "Told you not to speak of it." I didn't say anything, Giulio responded hastily. Mente. However, the small man asks too many questions. He's aware of the letters. A pause occurred. Before Teresa spoke, I could practically feel her eyes scanning the courtyard. Giulio interrupted. He won't if he discovers who wrote them. Not unless he is informed. And he lowered his voice if that occurred. Then we are all finished. As I adjusted, my chair made a faint scraping sound that appeared to reverberate. The discussion abruptly ceased. Teresa came out onto the courtyard. A little later, her smile too brilliant. Captain Hastings, she stated, enjoying the morning. Very, I answered as I stood up. She nodded and carried on without another word. Giulio following a few paces behind, his eyes set firmly on the ground. I was ready to return indoors when the gentle click of a side door caught my ear. I slipped silently into an archway shadow and watched Lady Bianca come out of the library. She was slightly behind Carlo Mazzetti. They paused in the covered hallway, their voices too low for the servants to hear, but loud enough for me to hear the rhythm of their conversation from where I was hidden. Bianca said in a low but urgent voice, "You shouldn't have come to me this morning, not here with the cops. They will only talk more as a result." Mazzetti's voice was tight as he answered, "I came because you are alone in this. Everything will be twisted by them." She cut off. If they find those letters, they already have. Yesterday, Poirot brought them up. Mazzetti muttered a curse. Then you need to be prepared. If he thinks they are yours, they're not mine. For the tiniest moment, Bianca lost her cool and snapped. She inhaled deeply. But if Alessander believed they were, then perhaps it explains why. She looked down the hallway and stopped suddenly. The words, "You know what that would mean for both of us," were spoken quietly by Mazzetti. Her stare held his for a bit longer than was necessary. "Yes, I am aware of it." Without saying another word, they parted ways. Mazzetti returned to the library while Bianca vanished inside the salon. The murmur of the fountain filled the silence, while I stayed in my hiding spot for a moment longer. The reciprocal caution of persons tied by a deadly knowing, rather than the intimacy of lovers, was evident in the way they communicated. I told Poirot about the meeting between Bianca and Mazzetti, as well as what I had learned from Teresa and Giulio when he returned that afternoon. He tapped his fingertips together after listening without interruption. You see, Hastings, you stay here, Tres and Teresa, and the truths find you like bees on a flower. Though mine was obtained from 3 separate postmasters and a very accommodating clerk in the Central Telegraph Office, I now have information as well. And Poirot's mustache trembled at my prompt. The letters were sent from 3 distinct locations, Siena, Lucca, and a little village close to Livorno, but they were all within the reach of a single individual who is undoubtedly in Florence right now. The pattern is starting to emerge. He called for the maid before I could ask him any more questions. He said, "Be so good as to gather the household in the salon at once." Lady Bianca, Teresa, Signora Bellini, Giulio, and Carlo Mazzetti were all gathered in a matter of minutes. The sharp edges of picture frames were caught by the slanted autumn light coming through the towering windows. With the bundle of L letters in one hand and the bronze inkwell in the other, Poirot stood in front of the hearth. "We're come to do a little reconstruction, Madame Messier," he started. This was how the Count sat. His visitor sat in the chair he had set up at the desk. They spoke to each other. Perhaps tempers flared, cracked next. The inkwell came down, death in one blow. He thumped the inkwell down purposefully. Everybody's eyes were on him. We discover a bundle of letters bound with green ribbon on his desk. The letter L is the sole one used to sign them. This is the room where their author is. A tremor swept through the assembly. Teresa's mouth twisted slightly. Giulio's eyes wavered. Mazzetti remained still. Lady Bianca's face could not be read. He turned to the entire group. "Before we discuss these letters once more, I would like each of you to take the chair that the visitor occupied, one at a time." Poirot then started to prepare the stage for what I was certain would be his last act, just like a director would do with his actors. The guest behind the curtains in Chapter 6. By the time we gathered again in the Grand Salon, the sky had been washed a faint Florentine blue by the rain. There was a jar in the shutters. Clean rectangles of light dropped on the carpet. Trim and serene, Poirot stood by the fireplace, the green ribbon packet of letters on the table, and the bronze inkwell on the mantel. "As promised, Madame Mischer, we will speak one by one," he remarked quietly. "We all go back to that morning exactly as it happened." He pulled a chair to the middle. "You will recall that this is the chair that was pushed back against the wall after being relocated. It was standing across from the Count's desk before it was moved. It was occupied by a guest. The lamp was lit, but the curtains were drawn. Pourquoi? Since the guest didn't want to be spotted from the lawn. He surveyed the space. "Please, mademoiselle." "Barty." Teresa sat down after gracefully crossing the carpet. Her black eyes met Poirot steadily. "Lady Bianca and you rode together," said Poirot, "and got back just before 10 o'clock. However, the Count was thoughtful and expecting to be left alone. When the valet delivered breakfast at 8 o'clock, he tucked his watch away. Very strange, Signora Bellini said. When a man plans to forget the hour, he puts his watch away. And before the sun reached its zenith, someone pulled the curtains. That was the anticipated guest." Teresa's cheeks turned, a pale shade of red. "You don't have any evidence that I came here," she responded calmly. Poirot whispered softly, "Macy." He made contact with the green ribbon. "When I looked at the desk yesterday, I saw it. I discreetly asked your maid to confirm that you used the same ribbon to tie your glove cases and hat boxes. Only L was signed by the hand that wrote the letters. Mademoiselle, your baptismal name is Teresa Lucia Barty." When Lady Bianca saw her cousin, her head snapped around her gaze. "Is this accurate?" Teresa looked her in the eye. "Yes," she stated plainly, "I cherished him." The Contessa spoke in a low, glass-edged voice. "In my home, under my roof. You have brought discredit to my name and shame to yourself. Teresa remained silent as her hands gripped the chair arms more tightly. Poirot's head cocked. You arrived that morning by the side stairway on the other side of the ante-room and took your current seat. Your letters were in the drawer with him. They spoke to each other. Perhaps there were tears, but when you left him, he was alive. He gestured. She lifted her chin and moved out of the way. Lady Bellini, like a judge, the housekeeper sat there. Poirot, you saw what others missed, Signora said. The curtains drawn, the watch in the drawer. You mentally store the house's keys. And customs, the police were informed of the hour by you. You did not touch the body when you noticed that the middle drawer was not completely closed. Nothing was disturbed by you. For that disciplined mind to felicit. There's only one thing you missed, the tiny imprint left by the chair on the carpet. Because, she answered sharply, I looked at the dead, not the furniture. I don't run, Anne. Inquiry, I run a house. Just so, Poirot answered, bowing slightly. Giulio, you can leave. The valet advanced, silent and stylish. He sat with his eyes down and his knees close together. According to Poirot, you told me you had breakfast at 8. The Count usually sipped coffee at the desk, therefore it was uncommon that you were told to leave it on the side table and leave. A little after 9 o'clock, you came back with the post and discovered him not responding. You have changed one little detail twice. Regardless of whether you get the housekeeping or the Contessa initially, this kind of inconsistency is not an error. There is a reason for it. You want to have control over who finds out about the visitor's presence first. Giulio opened his mouth. I wanted to spare the woman's embarrassment. He whispered. You wanted to spare one lady in particular. Poirot stated, you were aware of the letters. On your morning out, you at least posted them for her. For a gentleman's day errand from Florence, the postmarks are from Siena Luca, a community close to Lavoro. Yes, you are loyal, but only to the individual who handed you the envelopes. Giulio's gaze fell. She's nice to me, he muttered. Her name was not something I wanted on it. You can take a step back, Signor Mazzetti. The secretary arrived with a very straight back and a calm face. Only after Poirot pointed to the visitor's chair did he take a seat. Then he folded his lengthy hands in obedience. You handle the Count's documents, Poirot remarked in a nice tone. You are aware of his routines, including how he sets up his desk, where he stores his personal belongings, and how he wears his watch. You claim that you weren't here at 9 o'clock. However, according to the Central Telegraph Office, a man who answered your call dispatched a wire between 8 and 12 and was spotted. Returning by the river at 8, the Palazzo may be reached on foot in 10 minutes. One arrives by 9 if one has a purpose. Mazzetti's gaze wavered, then remained steady. Silently, I had no reason, he murmured. On the contrary, muttered Poirot. Holding the inkwell like a prop, he picked it up with a handkerchief. Your motivation was not love for Lady Bianca, but rather jealousy and love. That was the prevailing rumor, and it is untrue. You adored Teresa Bardi. Teresa's solitary breath was taken, softly and startled. Poirot didn't raise his voice. You found the letters not necessarily where they were hidden in the drawer, but that they were there. 2 nights prior, you were informed that the Count had visited Signorina Bard's quarters before moving on to his wife's. When he grew weary of Teresa, you were afraid of what a connection like that would think of her. In Italy, reputation is not a trifle. That morning, you went to beg, to threaten, maybe to haggle. They had already drawn the curtains. Just now, Moiselle had left. In the drawer was the watch. For once, he had refused to let the hour dictate his actions. Here you sat. Words turned into insults as he touched the back of the chair. He made fun of you. He grabbed his trophy, the drawer containing her letters. Poirot's hand suddenly dropped an inch into the air. The one blow was there. No, Teresa answered abruptly, fiercely and low. No, Mazzetti didn't give her a glance. He stared at the bronze lion. His voice was steady as he talked, but it sounded distant. His words, "He would have ruined her. We knew him better than you did. Until the town got rid of her, he would have paraded her. He would have put out her like a candle in that case. I instructed him to stop it, return the letters, and release her." He chuckled. His mouth tightened. He said, "There was no word. I was holding the inkwell. I just wanted him to pay attention." Poirot replied softly, "One blow," as the coroner discovered, from the side and behind. The inkwell dropped. You drew the drapes tighter, pushed the chair back against the wall, and partially closed the drawer. Then you went. The Count was already dead when Julia brought the post back. Nobody said anything. There was the sound of the courtyard fountain, steady and faint as a heartbeat. Teresa stepped forward. "Carlo," she said in a whisper, "why did you not come to me?" When he finally turned his head, I briefly noticed something simple and nude, almost boyish, in his face. "It was because you loved him," he continued. And the simplicity vanished like a mask as he came to a standstill. She straightened. "Because he was a count and I am a clerk," she stated. "I loved him," with the obvious fatalism of her nation. Or I believed I did. He gave me a sense of aliveness followed by fear. I failed in my attempt to stop it. I was under his control. Simply put, I was weak. Poirot bowed his head. "It's sufficient." The inspector came in with 2 men after waiting quietly in the vestibule. Mazzetti remained motionless for a moment. Then he stood, bowed politely to Lady Bianca, and smoothed his cuffs as if for an appointment. "I apologize," he said. Despite having an extremely pale complexion, Lady Bianca's voice remained steady. "I believe," she replied quietly, "that you meant to do a kindness. It was not yours to do. They removed him without a fight." The room appeared larger and more still once the door had closed. I discovered my voice. "Poirot," I said. "Teresa would be it. I was certain." He gave a headshake. No, Hastings. The drapes told me a woman had been the wish not to be seen. I was informed by the watch that a heart-to-heart contact was imminent. The chair informed me that there were 2 seats, but he furrowed his eyebrows at the chilly, accurate blow and the neatness that followed. That was the hand of a guy who lives by order, a secretary, not a lover in hysteria. I asked for the letters as well. He picked up the green ribbon and let it go through his fingers, saying the letters were the tinder. In Italy, amour is a bright, short-lived flame. However, envy is like a smoldering coal that a man breathes on one day. He turned his gaze to the large windows, where the late afternoon gold light had begun to soften. "The lines and proportions are perfect in Florence," Hercule remarked. "Never in the human heart. That's why men like me get jobs." He brought Lady Bianca out of the room after offering her his arm. Conclusion: Florence in the winter. In the first few days of February, we returned to Florence. There was snow on the hills. A sort of crystalline silence appeared to envelop the entire city as the Arno rushed swiftly and grayly. Poirot said that we would just pause for a few hours, but I could see his gaze tracking every street turn, as though the stones themselves might have the last say in the matter. The controversy was consumed by Florence in 3 months, just like the Arno swallows a leaf. The result in Mazzetti's December trial, which was swayed undoubtedly by influence and compassion for a man motivated by emotion, was manslaughter with 7 years in prison. After considering it as best they could, the newspapers looked to the carnival season. At her family's villa close to Siena, Teresa Bardi had taken refuge. There were rumors of an engagement to a young destitute, but devoted count who appeared intent on focusing only on her attractiveness. Lady Bianca, on the other hand, continued to be mistress of the Visconti Palazzo, albeit with a smaller household, fewer invites, and if at all, a more calm demeanor than before. All I can say about Giulio the valet is that he stayed quiet and loyal, as though nothing had happened. Florence has the ability to erase the things it decides to forget. Even though the cafe and the streets are the same, and the winter light is falling at the same angle as it was when we first arrived, I couldn't help but think of the bronze lion crouching on the carpet, the green ribbon in Poirot's hand, and the sound of voices in the courtyard as I passed the Palazzo's massive wooden doors. Admiring the city's marble façades order is one thing. It's quite another to be reminded that hearts beat as frantically behind them as they do everywhere else. In Florence, proportions are precise and beauty is flawless, yet passion disregards symmetry. Hercule Poirot's private documents, postscript. Florence, February 1929. A very instructive example of how crimes of passion are rarely uncalculated is the Visconti affair. Even a punch delivered with jealous rage must first pass through the intended corridors. Undoubtedly, Mazzetti died for love, but that love was tempered by wounded vanity and an innate need for symmetry. With all the consideration of a signature attached to an irrevocable contract, the bronze inkwell collapsed. Teresa Bardiluccia demonstrated the perilous appeal of youth dressed in self-dramatization in her letters that she dared to sign. As a coquette pursues glances, she courted danger, never acknowledging her fascination until the consequences were imminent. These women become better. The world is ashamed to discount the currency of beauty and uniqueness. Lady Bianca came out of it with her honor intact, her household diminished, and her control over the Palazzo unchallenged. She will stop talking about her cousin and instead present herself as a faultless heirloom jewel, hiding any imperfections behind the gold. As for Giulio, the quiet custodian of other people's misdeeds, his loyalty is of the kind that persists, without challenge and without recompense. According to his faith, a woman's secret is inviolable, even if she would be happy to part with it. Florence remains the eternal paradox, a city with facades that are the epitome of balance and proportion, but with innards that hide spaces of turmoil, ambition, and foolishness. Beauty is only lacking in this situation. Below, the passions are as disorganized as they can be any place in the world, because the current balance has been restored. However, symmetry is the most brittle of all. Passion is also patient in Florence. It bides its time to tip the scales once more while lurking in the shadows. Hercule Poirot will be there to bring the equilibrium back when it does. Music, thus death in the Palazzo comes to an end. If you've listened to the final word, you are part of the reason these mysteries continue to be recounted. Your feedback, your sharing of our tales, and your hands-on assistance enable Hastings' voice in Poirot's cases to be heard by people all around the world. Like all of our stories, this one has been meticulously planned from the time Lady Bianca's letter arrives at Whitehaven Mansions until the last unmasking in the Palazzo. Consider becoming a member for ad access and exclusive articles if you think we're doing something right, or consider providing a tip to help solve the next mystery. Yes, even the simplest gesture indicates that we should continue till our next case. Boronot, music.